Good morning to you today and welcome to another Sunday school lesson. I hope everyone has recognized and appreciated some blessings this past week. Sometimes we get so caught up in all the chaos that goes on every day in our life, and it seems like it gets bigger every day, that we just forget that we are blessed. On the worst days, we are blessed. And when, it may be an indication that excuse me, we may need to listen to the news a little bit less and listen for God to speak, or just listen for nature around us to remind us of how mighty God is and what a wonderful creator he is. And sometimes you ask for a request in a prayer and God answers it, and then you just totally forget. That happened to me one day this week. And as I prayed that night, I just had to stop and smile. I said, God, you did that. I asked you to do this, to handle this for me today, and you did it. And you just have to smile and give God the credit for what he does for you. There's a song that you might know if you're old enough. It was Anne Murray, and she sang a song that says, I sure could use a little good news today. And I just heard it recently on YouTube. It's pretty good to listen to every now and then. But since we don't have a whole lot of good news to hear on our broadcast, and let's all make sure that we look into our own lives and find the blessings that God's given to us every day. If you wake up every day, if you get up, then that's a blessing, and that means he's not done with you yet. He's still working on you. So our lesson today is from session 7, and it comes from chapter 14 in Proverbs. The title of it is Living Wisely. Now, I hope you had an opportunity to read a little bit of the scriptures from chapter 8 up to this point. And it may seem like that we're doing the same thing over and over, that we're reading the same instructions over and over, because for us, they're compiled into one big book of Proverbs. But keep in mind why these were written, when they were used, and they were recorded and used over several years, not just a few weeks like we're studying and utilizing them. But in this particular part of Proverbs, it was written in a literary form called chiasmus, which makes it a little harder to understand when you read the scriptures in chronological order. Because with this style of writing, there's a section of scriptures, and this section would be verses 8 through 15. And the main idea of all of the verses put together is in the center of the verses. So you read several verses, then you reach the main idea, and then you repeat the information from the first scriptures, but it's in reverse order. Now, we won't read them in chronological order, but in the way that they're linked by the same idea or instructions. So for that means verse 8 corresponds with verse 15. They both contrast a simple person and a prudent person. Verse 9 and 14 are linked together. They both speak of sin. Verses 10 and 13 address what is held in your heart. And 11 and 12 then are the main focus of the entire passage or poem. So you would read verse 8, 9, 10, 11 and 12 are the main idea, and then 13, 14, 15 are saying basically the same thing as 8, 9, 10, but in reverse order. Now, because of the pairing, this lesson will be very short, but I know you won't mind that. I won't take up much of your time this morning. So we're going to read the first pair, which would be verse 8 and verse 15. So if you're in your Bible and you're following, you have to skip around a little bit. So it will be verse 8 first. The wisdom of the prudent is to understand his way, but the folly of fools is deceit. And then we'll jump down to verse 15. The simple believeth every word, but the prudent man looketh well to his going. The prudent person is one who thinks through an opportunity or a challenge before they act or speak or make a final decision. They see danger because they take the time to assess the circumstances and they plan their actions accordingly. You may have at times spontaneously said something or reacted And then you thought, oh, well, why did I do that? Why did I say that? Why didn't I think first? Well, these people think first. And they appropriately use knowledge, biblical knowledge, to guide in every situation. In verse 8, the word way is used. Now, the whole chapter of the whole book of Proverbs sort of makes an analogy of the way that we live as a path that we choose. So this word indicates a path that is worn by constant use. It's not one that's tread on lightly or every now and then. It's one that's been worn down. It's a lifestyle of the wise, not just occasionally doing what is right, but leaning every day on God's instructions. I'm sure you've heard a saying that if you keep doing what you've always done, you'll keep getting the results that you've always gotten, or something like that, of that nature. A wise or prudent person evaluates their past experiences. They learn from their failures and correct mistakes so that they don't repeat and get the same unwise results. On the other hand, in the end of the other end of the spectrum is the foolish, simple, or inexperienced person. This person is incapable of making rational moral decisions. They are easily deceived because they believe whatever anyone may say. And their ideas may vary from day to day or from hour to hour, actually, depending on what the people around them say. They seek no guidance from godly instruction because they have no relationship with the Lord. They do not take the time to think through their situation, and they dive headlong into choices that are governed by themselves solely or influenced by the other people who are just as gullible as they are. But the good news is this: every person has opportunities to improve their character and circumstances. We need to improve by learning from our mistakes and correcting our direction in life. The next set of paired verses are 9 and 14. So verse 9 says, fools make a mock of sin, but among the righteous there is favor. And verse 14, its companion says, the backslider in the heart shall be filled with his own ways, and a good man shall be satisfied from himself. These two verses reveal making amends and being repaid for sins. In the culture of that day, reparation was a clear, well-stated law. Anyone who cheated or stole or lied had to make reparations or restitution to the victim of their lawlessness. And the law said they had to repay the loss plus an additional 20%. And they had to make a guilt or a trespass offering to the priest. Now, foolish people didn't take that law seriously. First of all, they didn't think they owed anyone anything, and then they thought the law did not apply to them and that no one would ever hold them accountable for their sinful behavior, and not even God would hold them accountable. Well, then also mentioned this pair of verses was a backslider. And that was a person who had started out in the right direction, or they started out on the wrong path, and they turned back or abandoned that path. They had abandoned their commitment to the covenant that God had made with his people. Both groups of these people assumed that they could sin without consequences to themselves. But verse 14 states that without God's mercy, all sinners get what their conduct deserves. So we are all sinners, and therefore we need to all be thankful for God's mercy, or we will get what our actions deserve. God's mercy assures that we don't really get what we deserve, because what we deserve we don't want, and because of God's mercy, and we need to be thankful for that. And then it says the foolish make a mockery of the law. They totally ignore any thought of accountability to God or to people for their attitude and actions. But then there's this other group that's mentioned in these two verses, and that's the people who recognize their covenant with God and they are in right standing with him. In Solomon's day, the covenant was between God and Israel. He gave them the 10 Commandments as they traveled from Egypt to the Promised Land. In our day, We have a covenant too, but it's between Christ and those who believe in him. Now, this group will also receive what they deserve, as well as have a significant outcome of contentment. And what they deserve is they're not punished for their sins because they've been forgiven for their sins. And that's where we need to really thank God for his mercy. These people have a sense of satisfaction because they know that they're aligned with God's instructions and purposes. We all make mistakes, but God knows what's in our heart and he knows our motive behind what we do. So now we're going to go to the next pair, verses 10 and 13. And they're actually the last two the last two that are paired together before going into the main idea of this type of writing. So verse 10 says, "The heart knoweth his own bitterness, and a stranger doth not intermeddle with his joy." And verse 13 says, "Even in laughter the heart is sorrowful, and the end of that mirth is heaviness." Now, our hearts can store up a large range of different emotions, and people in our lives may never know the true condition of our heart. We are so inclined to answer when someone says, "How are you? How you doing?" We'll say fine, or we'll say good. It comes out. And sometimes we may be holding inside a major sorrow that's weighing us down. And when people suppress their true feelings, sometimes they end up being bitter. And a person that's full of bitterness suffers alone. A bitter heart creates a person who can hold grudges, and they struggle to accept godly advice and instruction. I can be angry with you. I can be bitter about something that you've done. You may not even know it. I'm the one that's going to suffer for it, because you may be living your life happy-go-lucky and not even know that I'm angry with you, or that I'm upset, or that I'm bitter with you, or I'm holding a grudge, or I'm struggling to accept the godly advice of how to deal with the situation. I'm the one that's suffering for that. Now, verse 13 warns that at times, laughter really may be hiding sadness. And usually we associate laughter with happiness, but there are people whose laughter is really a cover-up for an intense sorrow. And you might think of comedians who have suffered with sadness to the point that they've taken their own lives. And we might think, well, they make everybody laugh. They've got to be the happiest people in the world, but they're hiding it. Now, we can empathize when others share their feelings, if they share their feelings, but God is the only one who really knows what the heart truly feels. A smile or a laugh is not a guaranteed sign of joy. It may be, but it's not always a sign of joy. It may indicate that there's a moment of happiness, but that might be based on a circumstance, and circumstances constantly change. True joy results from a faith in God, and it can exist in a person's heart and in their life, even when the situation is horrendous. Now, our country right now is in a pretty bad state of affairs, and but we don't sit around and mourn about it. We can still have that joy in our heart because we know that God truly is in control. We all have to face grief at some point in our life, but that doesn't have to be the end all for those who walk with God. Faith in him can sustain us even when our hearts are heavy. You know that little children's song is, "I've got that joy, 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 joy down in my heart." And then it says, "I've got that peace that passes understanding down in my heart." That's what the faith in God can give us. It truly does surpass understanding of the world. So now we come to verses 11 and 12, which are the central idea of the entire selection. These two verses, as I explained at the beginning, are sandwiched between the preceding three verses, 8, 9, 10, and the following three, 13, 14, 15. And I had to look this up because when you just read these scriptures, 8 through 15, it was a little complicated for me to understand. I was thinking I couldn't understand why are they saying the same thing. But when you understand the literary device that's being used, that makes it a little easier to understand. So verses 11 and 12 are the main idea. And verse 11 says, the house of the wicked shall be overthrown, but the tabernacle of the upright shall flourish. And verse 12 says, there is a way which seemeth right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. The contrast here is what becomes of one who chooses a foolish path versus the person who chooses the path of God's wisdom. A house, of course, usually signifies a permanent structure, but in this instance is actually referring to a lifestyle. The lifestyle of the wicked may look sturdy, and to their human evaluation, the path that they have chosen may seem to be the correct path to follow. But this path and this lifestyle is one that's built on a foundation of personal ideas. It's personal thoughts, your personal philosophies, your prejudices, and your values. And our brain power alone does not reveal to us what God stipulates to be right or wrong. We're not born knowing what God says is right and wrong. So this lifestyle is not built on a sturdy foundation. It cannot stand the judgment of time or God's accounting. It's built upon a flimsy foundation that in time will be overthrown and demolished. The main idea that Solomon wanted to communicate to his sons or to the young men that were being trained with these instructions is that choosing the way of wickedness has only one possible destiny, and that is destruction. The path may look good, it may be enticing, but the result is the way to death. Now, in comparison to a house, the word tabernacle was more like a tent or a movable shelter that was made of animal hides. And even though it appeared to be less permanent than a home or a house of the wicked or the lifestyle of the wicked, the Israelites recognized it as a place where God was present. The tabernacle was that transportable worship sanctuary that they moved with them as they traveled from Egypt to the Promised Land. It housed the Ark of the Covenant. That was a covenant that God had made with his people. And the 10 Commandments that were given to Moses were housed in the Ark of the Covenant. Because the tabernacle represented a lifestyle where God is central, it represented a location where God is central, then the tabernacle represents a lifestyle that has God in its center. It represents a life that not only survives the test of time, but is a life that also will thrive with God's blessings. So, in closing, each of us gets to choose a path for our own life. It'd be nice if if we were born and we were sat down on the path that we were to choose, that we were to take, and we didn't have any, we said we have spiritual blinders. We're not lured away from it. But we get to choose the path of our own life. And some of us depend on our own imagination or resourcefulness only. But choosing a path without guidance from God, without applying the knowledge and the instructions provided in the Bible, by choosing that, we're setting ourselves up for a life of we're just hoping that what we choose will bring fulfillment. Or we're just putting our lives into a guessing game. Maybe this works, maybe it doesn't work. Well, I'll try something else. Maybe that works. So we want to ask ourselves this: how does your life so far show that you seek and follow God's wisdom? And the key words here may be so far. If we haven't been seeking God's wisdom, that can change. None of us can change the past. but we can make changes now that make a difference in the future. So, how has your life been seeking God's wisdom so far? And then another question to ask yourself is this: what can you do to follow God's wisdom? Or what can you do to more consistently follow his wisdom? Remember that path that was worn because it was a daily following of God. So now I want to thank you once again for joining in today. Let's all continue to pray for our country, for each other, for all the situations, and for every person that this country embraces. And I pray that you will stay safe and help keep everyone around you safe and have a blessed week. Thank you.